Renewed outrage today in Baltimore as an officer walks free.
No justice, no peace. Jail killer police.
Protesters angry with the acquittal in the Freddie Gray case. The ban on arms sales to Vietnam is lifted. Human rights activists speak out. The Pope embraces an imam. How today's meeting breaks a 5-year gap in Catholic-Muslim relations. And a new chapter in the war on terror. The U.S. targets the Taliban and ISIS as the extremists strike back. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 23rd, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Protesters speak up after a Baltimore police officer is acquitted of assault and other charges in the arrest of Freddie Gray last year.
No justice, no peace. Jail killer police.
Edward Nero is one of 6 officers charged in the case. Prosecutors say he unlawfully detained Gray, then failed to restrain him with seatbelts in a police van where he suffered a broken neck. Gray's death a week later sparked protests and riots in Baltimore. His family says they respect today's verdict. Protesters are not satisfied.
It could be my child. I don't want that for my child.
I think that this case really gutted the remaining cases.
What became most challenging, I think, for the state is when the trial order got reshuffled. Officer Nero, whose case certainly appears to be the weakest, was in the leadoff spot.
The manslaughter trial of another officer, William Porter, ended in a hung jury in December. The other officers are set to be tried separately this summer and fall. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama lifts the ban on selling military equipment to Vietnam. He is attempting to normalize relations with the communist country, once a bitter enemy of the U.S. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Brian, the president is on a week-long tour of Vietnam and Japan. Today he met with Vietnamese leaders to announce the arms deal and to reaffirm U.S. commitment to trade with a former enemy-turned-partner. But some U.S. lawmakers are denouncing the deal, saying it was made without any human rights concessions. President Obama is officially welcomed to Vietnam by President Tran Dai Quang at the presidential palace in Hanoi. At a news conference, the president announced the lifting of the decades-old ban to sell military equipment to Vietnam. It's a rule that has been in place since the Vietnam War.
As with all our defense partners, sales will need to still meet strict requirements, including those related to human rights. But this change will ensure that Vietnam has access to the equipment it needs to defend itself and removes a lingering vestige of the Cold War.
Washington partially lifted the embargo in 2014, but Vietnam wanted full access as it tries to deal with China's claim on land in the disputed South China Sea. And the president thanked Vietnam for its attempts to locate American veterans missing in action. At the end of the day, the president popped into a noodle shop to have dinner with CNN host Anthony Bourdain for an episode of his show airing in September. President Obama acknowledged differences with Vietnam, including human rights violations. Jason Calvi joins us now from the Capitol with reaction to the president's trip here in Washington. Jason?
Lauren, the U.S. House says growing military relations with Vietnam needs to be based on that country promising to protect human rights. That was in the National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the House last week. But today, Human Rights Watch and other groups are slamming the president's move. But there is good news for one Catholic priest.
Ahead of President Obama's visit, Vietnam released the jailed priest, Nguyen Van Ly.
We are very concerned about his health.
The 70-year-old priest has spent 23 years in jail. The Nobel Peace Prize nominee is known for promoting human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam.
He always talks about bringing happiness to others, respecting other people's dignity.
The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom estimates 6 million Catholics live in Vietnam. They say the country has made progress on religious freedom, but religious groups across Vietnam remain fearful the government will seize religious property through eviction or demolition, and believe the government is targeting them for their faith. And in Giao Li province, police attacked Catholics, including nuns. Dr. Tong Nguyen himself escaped Vietnam in 1978. He thinks the United States should push for more freedom in Vietnam.
I think it is regrettable that we are giving away the only significant leverage left for the U.S. to push Vietnam to improve human rights.
As the United States and Vietnam open new doors in their 20-year diplomatic relationship, President Obama admits the two countries disagree on human rights.
We respect Vietnam's sovereignty and independence. At the same time, we will continue to speak out on behalf of human rights that we believe are universal, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly.
19 members of Congress wrote the president before his trip, urging him to bring up human rights violations during his trip to Vietnam. Tomorrow, lawmakers and activists will stand together. They're pushing for the release of 100-plus prisoners of conscience in Vietnam, some of them jailed for their faith. Brian?
Thanks, Jason Calvi at the Capitol. A top U.S. general in Afghanistan says a drone strike that killed a high-ranking Taliban leader is a step toward peace in the region. That as Afghan leaders work to end a long-standing insurgency plaguing that country. Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with that story.
Brian, the death of Mullah Mansour is being called a game changer. President Obama says his death marks an important milestone in the work to bring peace to Afghanistan.
In a rare moment of unity, both Afghanistan's president and chief executive welcomed news of Mullah Mansour's death. He's blamed for organizing violent attacks against innocent civilians and coalition forces. American and Afghan military leaders describe Mansour as an obstacle to peace.
I'm glad he's gone. Mansour played a key leadership role in not only orchestrating the Taliban, but orchestrating a variety of other organizations to include the Haqqani Network and Al-Qaeda.
Afghanistan's intelligence agency confirms Mansour was killed Saturday when a U.S. drone fired on his vehicle in Pakistan. The Pakistani prime minister says the drone attacks were a violation of his country's sovereignty. Still, Afghan officials say Mansour's death is a crippling blow to the Taliban. The Afghan Interior Ministry spokesperson saying this year will be the year of destruction and defeat of the Taliban, saying Mansour's death has made the terrorists weak in all parts of the country. Marvin Weinbaum, a former State Department analyst in Washington, disagrees.
Well, that's just hopeful thinking. All the evidence to date is that they can carry on this insurgency in Afghanistan almost regardless of what's happening at the top as they jockey for position.
Weinbaum says while there still may be a struggle to pick the next leader, the Taliban still has a strong foothold in the country.
There really is no one there who is more amenable to talks. And so the idea that with Mullah Mansour gone, that somehow this is going to pave the way for perhaps a resumption of those talks, I think is illusionary.
Today, President Obama stressed the drone strikes the U.S. is carrying out against the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan do not mean there will be a shift in the military approach. He stresses that the U.S. is not re-entering into day-to-day combat operations. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsbee, thank you. A major battle is underway to recapture an Iraqi city controlled by ISIS. Troops launched an offensive trying to regain control of Fallujah. The U.S. coalition is providing air support for the offensive. ISIS militants have controlled Fallujah since January of 2014. The Iraqi prime minister says friendly forces have already scored big successes. A series of explosions leave 80 people dead and 200 injured in Syria. The coordinated suicide bombings rocked two normally quiet towns on the Syrian coast. ISIS claims responsibility for these attacks at bus stations, a gas station, and a hospital. The bombings are the first targeting civilians in those areas. ISIS also claims responsibility for a pair of bombings in Yemen that killed at least 45 army recruits. Many others were wounded. Yemen's government has been at war for nearly 2 years against Shiite rebels who control the capital. The country is also home to active Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates. The president-elect of the Philippines criticizes the Catholic Church in his country. Rodrigo Duterte calls it the most hypocritical institution, accusing some bishops of corruption, even sexual misconduct. He opposes Catholic teaching, calling for the use of contraceptives. He's even offered cash to those who agree to undergo tubal ligation and vasectomies. He's quoted as saying he wants to impose a 3-child policy in this predominantly Catholic country that could lead to forced abortions. Pope Francis meets with a prominent Sunni imam, paving the way for better dialogue with Muslims. The Pope says the meeting itself with Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayeb is important. It follows a 5-year lull and comes at a time of increased attacks on Christians. They spoke for about 25 minutes in the Pope's private library before bidding farewell with an embrace. The Vatican puts to rest rumors about the miraculous apparitions of Our Lady in Portugal nearly 100 years ago. It denies recent claims that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI said the third secret of Fatima was not released in its entirety. The Holy See Press Office released a statement this weekend. That statement responds to the recent blog post that then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger told someone the third secret of Fatima was not completely published. It says Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI confirms decisively that the publication of the third secret of Fatima is complete. Dr. Chad Pecknold is a theology professor at the Catholic University of America. Where do these rumors come from, and why is it so important that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI actually issued a statement?
Yeah, well, the rumors come from a blog post where rumors of a professor named Ingo Dullinger, who's a Brazilian theology professor and an old friend of Pope Benedict, said to this blogger that the revelation wasn't complete. And there's no living person who's more associated with Fatima and investigating Fatima than Benedict, so he had to say something.
So explain the third secret and why it was partially fulfilled with Pope John Paul II.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are 3 secrets, and they have to do with hell is the first one and war is the second one. And the third one has to do with a papal figure who climbs a great mountain and is shot and killed in the secret. But of course, the prophecy seems to be about JP2, but he wasn't killed. He was shot. So it seems to be a prophecy about his assassination. But as Pope John Paul II said, one hand pulled the trigger and one hand guided the bullet. So it seems to be the prophecies of Fatima are actually steering us to repentance and prayer, that these aren't fatalistic predictions of what's going to happen, but calls to take up the rosary and pray.
And he was shot on the feast of Our Lady of Fatima.
Right, and he clearly understood that Our Lady of Fatima was the one who guided the bullet away from
He says she protected her.
She protected him.
Even Mother Angelica questioned whether or not the secret was released completely. Are there others out there?
Yeah, I think there are, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate desire to want more from Fatima, because there is more. I mean, Fatima's mission is not complete. Even though the texts that we have are complete, Fatima's mission isn't complete. And that mission is a mission of purification, a mission to call us all to repentance, to call us all to prayer against all the evils in the world. The third secret is really about all the persecution and damage that can be done to the church. And look at the world today. We're seeing a lot of persecution around the world, and so Fatima, her mission is not complete.
And next year marks 100 years since the apparitions. Dr. Chad Pecknold of the Catholic University of America, thanks.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, an American diplomat in Rome talks with us about the push to protect religious minorities. And the newest member of the Commission for International Religious Freedom joins us in studio. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Defending the rights of Christians and other minorities in the Middle East is the full-time focus of a U.S. State Department official. Knox Tames is the special advisor for religious minorities in the Near East and South and Central Asia. He is meeting with Vatican officials this week. Our own producer Mary Shovlin caught up with him today.
Mr. Tames, thank you for being with us on the program this evening.
My pleasure.
What are the biggest challenges these religious minorities are facing throughout the world? It's not just Christians that we're focusing on here. It's all religious minorities, wherever they may be. What are the biggest challenges they're facing?
I think first is just increasing intolerance towards diversity or pluralism. We see that expressed through acts of violence, where religious minorities, people who are Christians, Muslims, Shia, Hindus, or even atheists, are targeted because they believe the wrong thing. And we've seen non-state actors in particularly seek to do them harm. At the same time, we have authoritarian repression, where the state wants to impose a particular viewpoint on all communities, and those who disagree or have a different interpretation face the criminal penalties and are sent to jail. So it's both governments and non-state actors are the two prongs of this pressure on religious freedom.
You're here to meet with representatives in the Vatican. Who have you met with, and what were those discussions involved?
So I met with Cardinal Sandri, had a very good conversation about the church, the Eastern Church, the pressures that they're facing in places like Iraq and Syria. Heard about his concerns about the flock that he's managing in ways. We had a very good conversation about how we as an international community, the United States, the Holy See, can promote this concept of shared citizenship, that it's not about your ethnicity or your belief system, it's that you're a citizen. And how do we instill that virtue in countries and help them understand that that approach will actually raise up everyone and make a country more stable, more prosperous, more progressive, and also asked to be connected with the bishops from the different synods so that we can have that direct communication and hear from them the concerns that they're experiencing, because they're out there on the front lines, literally in a lot of these conflict zones, ministering and have invaluable perspectives.
You meet with a lot of government representatives. What is it that you ask governments to do when you sit down with them? They can help make a difference.
Well, first, if they're part of the problem, we encourage them to reform laws and policies that may be leading to persecution or repression of communities. If they've got terrorists or extremists who are seeking to do harm, we press them to do the first role of governing, which is to protect minorities, protect people who believe and think differently. That's through police protection, prosecutions, to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable. And then for those here in the West, we're looking for ways that additional resources can be provided. If you look at Iraq, a place like Iraq, if we're going to see a day where minorities feel like they have a future in the country, basic services like sanitation, electricity, security, education need to be provided, and that's going to take reconstruction funds and more than our government can provide. And so it's the donor community is also going to have to find ways to redouble the effort so that there'll be something worth staying for in these communities that have been ravaged by violence.
Thank you so much. We wish you all the best in this important work.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you, Marion. A Cuban-American freedom fighter is recently named to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. You serve as an independent body advising the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. The appointment is made by the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And that is Christina Arriaga. You know her as the Executive Director of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Congratulations on this new appointment.
Thank you very much. It's such a great honor.
Tell us about USERF and what it does.
The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom is the only commission in the entire world that surveys religious liberty violations all over the world and makes recommendations to the President of the United States and to Congress on how to proceed and how to raise awareness of these issues.
Is it significant that the commissioners, including yourself, are outside of government?
Oh, absolutely. This is a group of volunteers that are experts on religious liberty issues, and we get together and look at reports from all over the world.
Christina, we don't have a chance normally to talk about your background so much, but isn't this really personal for you?
Extraordinarily personal. My mother was in a concentration camp in Germany. My father fled Cuba precisely because of persecution and abuse of human rights. And to me, this is really the fulfillment of an entire career devoted to human rights and religious liberty.
I'm sure your parents are very proud of you.
My mother is very proud, and my father would have been very proud. He passed away a few years ago, but his greatest honor and privilege was the fact that I was serving my country, a country that he loved and a country that he always said we were so lucky that he had welcomed us with open arms.
Well, I believe he is still proud of you. So tell us a little bit about now that they're trying to normalize relations with Cuba. Now we hear that Vietnam falls into that category. What can this commission do? Is there any leverage here in terms of these human rights violations, this religious freedom issue?
Absolutely. Raising awareness, truth is a great beacon of light, and the fact that the commission will be naming names and taking names and talking about people who are imprisoned and people whose rights are being abused. Just today, Father Lee, a Catholic priest in Vietnam, was released. The commission worked on highlighting his plight for many years. He had been in prison since 2007. And the fact that human rights are being violated in Cuba for the last 2 years alone, over 300 houses of worship have been destroyed. And I will make it my mission at the commission to make sure that the plight of the people of Cuba is front and center.
Are you confident that it can improve for them?
That the situation of religious...
In Cuba?
Yes, because I have great faith in the courageous people of Cuba. There are a lot of people who are still defying the government in spite of the fact that the government wants to repress them. I mean, how courageous is it to stand up and say, I believe in God in Cuba right now, and get thrown into prison, and people do it every single day.
Christina Arriaga, thank you so much for being with us, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Up next, Catholic Extension makes a difference for struggling parishes in the South. And the Special Olympics gets a boost from the Knights of Columbus. On Monday, May 23rd, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. A Catholic group dedicated to supporting poor mission dioceses in the U.S. marks a special celebration this weekend. Catherine Zeltner spoke earlier with a leader of the Catholic Extension who says the mission and the faith is growing in the South.
Joe Boland is Vice President of Mission for Catholic Extension. Joe, this was a big weekend for your group. Tell us about a church construction project in Georgia.
Yes, so they were dedicating St. Anthony's Church down in Ray City, Georgia. And I think what was so special about this particular community is that it was founded and established this past weekend as a multicultural parish. This is one of 32% of the churches in the South now that are specifically multicultural parishes. So it's beautiful to see this latest installment of the Catholic Church in rural Ray City, Georgia.
And you're talking about multicultural, multi-ethnic in the Deep South. What kind of leadership does it take to make a parish like St. Anthony's succeed?
One of the things, as I've been told, that's so key to the success is that everybody there feels a sense of ownership of the community, that there's not one group that feels that they're the landlords while perhaps the newcomers feel like, they're in someone else's house. A parish has to be everybody's home. And so pastors and parish leaders have to actively work to bring communities together so that they all feel that this is their home.
Now, Catholic Extension really does span the U.S., but where is your group seeing the most growth of the Catholic Church in the United States?
Yeah, so often we hear the narrative that the Catholic Church is shrinking. It's actually growing, though, and it is true that there are some places where the population might be changing, but there's other areas of the country where it's really not just growing, but exploding. And so we pay close attention to what we call the Sun Belt, that area of the South, including the Deep South, like Georgia, where the Catholic population is just growing by leaps and bounds. And so our original work to help build churches really continues on into today to make sure that the people of God have space to do all the things that the church needs to do well for our church and for our society.
Joe Boland of Catholic Extension, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And thanks, Catherine. Special Olympics gets a boost from the Knights of Columbus. The Knights helped sponsor this weekend's soccer tournament in Rome. The unified football tournament featured players with and without disabilities. 4 teams from Italy took on teams from France, Hungary, Lithuania, and Poland. Special Olympics is a long-term commitment for the Knights.
This is about the athletes, about their abilities, about giving them a chance, because I believe that the Special Olympics athletes don't ask for special treatment. They just ask for a chance, and we're very happy to provide that.
Logan Ludwig says Special Olympics fits with the Year of Mercy. He says, quote, "It is a way for us to show that we support individuals in all walks of life at various stages and with various abilities." The Knights also support EWTN News Nightly. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us, and we leave you tonight with the Trinity Sunday Angelus from St. Peter's Square. The Pope speaking about the Blessed Trinity from his studio above the square. Good night. God bless you.